David Sokol is chairman of MidAmerican Energy Holdings, a unit of Warren Buffett's investment conglomerate Berkshire Hathaway. Mr. Sokol is among the business leaders gathered here in Hong Kong for the ICC World Business Summit, organized by the International Chamber of Commerce and the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. Mr. Sokol, thanks for joining us. Now, the ICC Business Summit centers on the theme New Global Economic Realities, Asia-Pacific Perspectives. Why is it important to get the Asian perspective?
Well, I think the economic catastrophe of 2008 that covered many parts of the world, that recession and the ongoing recovery from that recession is going to be enormously impacted, both from the North American region, Europe, and Asia. And so I think the Asian perspective is very important, given that it is the one segment of the world that's continuing on a fairly strong growth pattern.
Does Asia figure in your company's strategy in the next 2 or 3 years?
Well, it already does. We've got significant investments in Asia, and we used to own some geothermal facilities that were build, operate, transfer contracts in the Philippines. So the Philippine government owns those today. We have a highly efficient hydroelectric facility in the Philippines. So we're constantly looking for opportunities, particularly on the environmental side of investing.
Now that climate change is part of the global agenda, what does this mean for industries in the energy business?
I think ultimately climate change and its effects throughout the world, from the standpoint of business investment and opportunity, is ultimately going to be best determined by governments. The G20 countries or more getting together and deciding, first of all, whether in their view, it is man-made CO2 that is causing climate change, and if so, what kind of global initiatives are these countries going to take. To date, it has unfortunately been a bit of a patchwork quilt of speeches and headlines from various countries claiming that they're going to do things. But the reality is it's a global issue, and it's got to be addressed on a global basis. Once that's done, assuming that we're going to move away from 200 years of a carbon-based global economy, there's going to be a lot of investment opportunity, I think, not only in renewables, but very importantly, electric vehicles, battery storage for grid stabilization in the utilization of renewables, and then also, I think, a resurgence throughout most of the world of significant nuclear investment. I think that investors have to look very carefully at which companies are investing in what types of technologies. Investors are going to have to try and assess the future political outcomes of various countries as to where they're likely to end up in a regulatory process. And it's a very uncertain time, actually, to invest. There's a lot of potential, but the actions of government can make that potential either realizable or a waste of money.
So despite the lack of government commitment so far, where are the opportunities do you see for foreign investors to tap into China's green industry?
China is leading the way much more significantly, both on research and development for renewable energy, battery storage, but also, I think, on promoting modern use of nuclear energy. If you kind of look where China's been going, they're emphasizing more efficient transportation networks, electric vehicles. They're building substantial numbers of nuclear facilities as well as renewables, and beginning to de-emphasize, as they economically can, the use of coal. And I think that's, the U.S., I think, will have to go in that same direction.
Now, Berkshire Hathaway has a stake in China's electric car maker BYD. What makes BYD a good investment?
We tend to invest in kind of fundamental businesses at a fair value equation with people that we think are in the business for the right reasons and for the long term. And BYD really, fulfilled that set of criteria. Their chairman, Wang Xuanfu, is clearly a visionary in the environmental side of the world. And that meant a lot to us because it was clear he was looking very much into the future from the standpoint of how he was structuring his company. I'll never forget the first conversation I had with him about why are you focused on battery technology, and particularly the type of batteries that they're developing. And his comment was, well, I want the battery to be completely inert. I want it to be non-harmful to the environment. And he made a comment that he said, in past history, we've always solved one environmental problem by creating another one, and that he didn't want to be part of that. So it showed some of his visionary capability. The other thing about BYD is we've been very impressed with their ability to identify something they want to do and then execute upon it. And so those Those are kind of the key criteria that we've seen, and they're very much focused, we think, in the right areas, electric vehicles, battery storage for utilities, solar, and doing a lot of very good things there.
Hong Kong has recently developed its own version of electric car called My Car. Is this a type of business that you would be interested in?
We tend not to look at things like electric car, but more the fundamental investing around the important pieces that will have to go in to make a vehicle like that successful long term. So we don't think we're smart enough to know who the winners will be. So from the standpoint of BYD, we're much more interested in the fact that they're developing advanced battery technology that can go in any car that happens to win, the charging technology, the storage technology for renewable energy on the grid system, which we think is critical. And so whether or not, for instance, their solar technology ends up being one of the primary winners is interesting, but the more important part is you can only have a successful, broad-based renewable energy portfolio in any country if you can develop significant battery storage to maximize the value of that renewable source. So what we're really looking for there is more the broad technologies that will support the ultimate industries around it versus trying to figure out which car company will end up with the best models, because that's pretty hard to pick.
And finally, what is the significance of the ICC Business Summit being held here in Hong Kong?
Anybody today that's investing in a meaningful way has to be cognizant of the global realities of Asia, of Europe, and of North and South America. Historically, people could be much more myopic, if you will, and just focused in a region or an area, or in the United States, even in a state or two. The reality today is that everything's interconnected in one fashion or another. So I think having the summit here makes sense, and I think investors are wise if they don't spend enough time in Asia to make sure they begin spending time in Asia to get a better vantage point on the dynamics here, which are absolutely affecting Europe as well as North and South America.
Thanks, Mr. Sokol, for joining us. Mr. Sokol spoke at the ICC World Business Summit held this year in Hong Kong.